It's dubious. I mean, the challenge is this notion of cause is not well developed in the law. No other president has actually tried to fire a governor for cause. There's some things that obviously would be justifiable bases for removing somebody if she was derelict in her duties or abusing her position. It would very easily justify this type of dismissal. Here, all we have are allegations. We don't actually have a fully developed record because there's been no due process. And there is a possibility that this is in that gray space where it's just not clear if the types of actions, even if true, would justify a firing.
What legal arguments is Cook's team likely to make in defense of her position? What grounds does she and her legal team have under existing statutes?
Yeah, I mean, so the statutory scheme provides that a governor of the Federal Reserve can only be removed for a cause. They otherwise have 14-year terms. And we actually have seen recently the Supreme Court make it shed a lot of light suggesting it's about to overrule earlier precedent, allowing other independent agencies to actually be independent. So we see this very broad reading of the president's executive authority. But the court said, well, the Fed is different. The court went out of its way in a very short opinion to say the Fed is different. They have a different history, and we know that. And Congress has gone out of its way to create these types of protections. So I think what she's going to argue is that this has nothing to do with mortgage fraud. This has everything to do with President Trump wanting to pack the Fed with his chosen appointees. And that's the one thing the law is clear that he's not allowed to do. He's not allowed to remove somebody just because of policy differences.
But what if she did falsify mortgage documents? What if what Bill Pulte, who heads FHFA, has alleged that she did falsify mortgage documents? What if she did that?
I mean, so the law here just isn't developed. Again, like this is a hard thing. So generally speaking, cause most of the time arises because of shortcomings in how somebody is performing their duties. This is something that happened before she joined the Fed. And we also don't know the intent, like whether the term mortgage fraud.
Does intent matter with this?
Yes, it does actually.
Please explain how that works here, because maybe she made a mistake is what you're saying?
Yeah, we just don't know. Again, intent, a core element of fraud, any type of fraud, is a requirement that the person intended to defraud a party. And so that's, again, it's an issue that we just don't know yet. But I think you're getting to a bigger issue, which is, there's two different issues. One is, what's really going on here? Is this a justifiable basis for removing her? But two, like, let's look at the general context in which this is happening. And I think the bigger point here is that President Trump clearly is not going to tolerate an independent Fed. I mean, this isn't coming out of the blue. This is coming less than a month after he similarly alleged that he was going to try to fire current chair, Jay Powell, because of cost overruns associated with the renovations. I think he realized there that his case was thin, and so ultimately he walked away on that. But this doesn't look like what he's really trying to do is just to make sure that he has a team of people that are fulfilling their duties under the law, but instead that he has his team in place. And so it's going to be hard for a court to completely ignore the environment in which this is happening.
And based on my understanding, establishing a for-cause removal usually requires some type of proceeding that would allow Cook to answer questions and answer the charges and present evidence. Cook's lawyer said that this lacks any factual or legal basis. By this, I mean the challenge to Trump's action. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, so normally you would have to have some type of due process for that for-cause protection to have any bite. If you say, like, they can only be removed for cause, but all you need are allegations and somebody's job could be terminated, then as a practical matter, you haven't given any teeth to that for-cause requirement. And we can go back to 1935 when Congress created this particular version of the Federal Reserve. And throughout the debates, there is repeated references to the fact that they don't want the president to have too much ability to control the Federal Reserve. This was during FDR's reign. So it was another period where you had a very strong president that was trying to increase his control. And Congress refused to give FDR, really the proposal that FDR put forward, in the form that he wanted it to be passed because they were worried about too much presidential control. So congressional intent here is very clear that what they were trying to guard against was a president. And again, the reason they're worried about that is presidents consistently want slightly more accommodative monetary policy. And sometimes it's warranted, but allowing monetary policy to be more accommodative than is warranted does lead to a higher likelihood of inflation and other significant costs for the long-term health of the economy.
We're speaking with Kathryn Judd. She's the Harvey J. Goldschmidt Professor of Law at Columbia Law School. She's the author of Direct: The Rise of the Middleman Economy and the Power of Going to the Source. She joins us right now from Oxford.
You mentioned that it could be politically motivated. Why do you think it's Lisa Cook specifically? We know that her term doesn't expire until 2038.
So again, I think that you might have just been looking for any of the Biden appointees where there happened to be something colorable. And it is important to acknowledge that there's at least a colorable claim here, right? We do want Federal Reserve governors to be credible individuals who are respected and who are doing their utmost to fully comply with the law. And so it could be, and it looks like this might be the case, that they were looking around for dirt on any of the current governors. I mean, another aspect of this that is really disturbing is just that the government has all kinds of information about all of us, right? So we have all the mortgage documents, you have tax filings, banks file suspicious activity reports, and you don't even know one's been filed about you. And so the Treasury has just this boatload of information that banks have provided about transactions their customers have engaged in. And so there's also this real question over, does all of that information suddenly become available for partisan purposes? And so that's a separate issue that seems related.
What's the position that the Federal Reserve finds itself in right now? The full statement from the Federal Reserve, it's 5 paragraphs, and the Federal Reserve said, as always, the Federal Reserve will abide by any court decision. It seems like the Fed is actually threading this needle pretty well and saying, look, we'll do whatever the courts tell us to do, but the courts haven't spoken yet.
Yeah, I think it's prudent in some ways. They're trying very hard, I think, not to alienate the president more than necessary. On the other hand, it is a somewhat weak position because, again, there hasn't been any due process yet. So, and they know that there hasn't been any due process yet. So there was a question of like, do they even allow this decision to stand and wait for the courts? Or do the opposite and say, look, until there's been some due process, we're still going to treat her as Governor Cook with all of the rights associated with that position. But once the court has spoken, then we're going to defer that decision. So even though I think the Fed was very careful here, they did take a posture that was more deferential to the president than the one they might have taken.
Based on all the facts at hand, and given your really impressive background, what is your best guess on how this situation will end up being?
I mean, so I think the biggest lesson here is it's not about Governor Cook, it's about Fed independence. And so when I look at what's happening right now, I think the days of Fed independence are numbered. It's already been whittled down meaningfully through the repeated attacks on Powell. But I think we see something much more pernicious going on, where it's not just these individual attacks, but a president signaling fundamental discomfort with there being such a powerful arm of government that he doesn't have control over. And so if he's willing to whip out every stop imaginable until the Fed is really willing to do his biting, that's going to be a very different world than the one that we've lived in for the past like 5 or 6 decades.
So in your view, what should Congress do?
I think Congress ideally should uniformly come out and condemn the decision as inconsistent with the statutory scheme that was created. And again, it's hard. They didn't specify any procedures or process, but inherent in that term cause suggests there has to be something more than a mere allegation. So I think the most heartening thing would be to say, like, look, the president does have the ability to make these allegations, and perhaps there's even the possibility that there should be some type of hearing on these allegations. But I think Congress ideally should stand by the statutory language that they put into place in 1935.
Right.
That said, look, it's really important for the Fed to remain independent. And that's because, again, there can be meaningful short-term economic gains from more accommodative monetary policy. So there's reasons the president wants to do this. It's a very smart move, a shrewd move on his part. That doesn't mean it's in the long-term best health of the interests of the economy or the country.
You clerked for Justice Stephen Breyer on the Supreme Court. We have 5 seconds. Yes or no? Does it go to the Supreme Court?
Yes.
All right. There it is.